I don't know, like, what do you do when you're just with yourself? You just kind of think about the truth. And I asked myself the question of, who would I be if no one was looking? Like, if there were no consequences and I could choose right now, what would my gender identity be? How would I present? And I was a man. I would be a man. And from there, I was more stable in my home and my finances, and I was able to really kind of take off and become my authentic self.
Welcome to Normalizing Non-Monogamy, the podcast where we interview incredible people from all over the world to hear their personal journeys of self-discovery through the lenses of love, sex, and relationships.
Our mission is to show people that they're not alone and to inspire them to embrace their true selves so that together we can open minds and live authentically without shame.
We believe everyone's story is powerful and beautiful, yet it's important to remember that everyone does life a little bit differently and that the views and opinions expressed by our guests do not necessarily reflect our own.
Additionally, we aren't doctors. Please consult a medical professional for anything regarding your health that you might learn about on the show. Enjoy!
Welcome to episode 354. We're Finn and Emma, and today we talk with Bear and Fifi. Bear was born and raised in Brooklyn. Fifi is from the Bronx, and today they walk us through their beautiful and long New York love story.
Yes, it's a New York love story for the ages.
It is.
It's amazing. Yeah, we're super excited about this conversation, and I think the piece that stuck out to me is the way that Bear and Fifi showed up in one another's lives and helped one another discover and embrace who each of them are. And as they call it, it's a mutually uplifting partnership. And I think the other piece that I absolutely love about this is that it doesn't follow any traditional scripts of what a partnership should look like. The way they describe themselves are two solo polyamorists who live together and run a business. They also call each other family and comrades. And the depth of love and connection between these two is incredible. So you're in for a treat today.
You are. They've also been in each other's lives for longer than they've been dating, and even at times put pieces together. They didn't even know it.
Yeah.
They were in each other's lives.
Yeah.
So it's just a beautiful, beautiful story conversation. Thank you, Bear and Fifi, so much for sharing with us.
And thank you for the work you do out there in the world. We wanted to make sure everybody knows that Bear and Fifi are Tantra practitioners, relationship coaches, content creators, event producers, and so much more.
Links to all of their work can be found in the podcast show notes. So go either in your podcast player or go to our website, normalizingnonmonogamy.com, and go to the podcast tab and you can find out all of the links there.
Yes, and they'll definitely talk more about their work and what that looks like and how you can work with them right when we get into the interview, which, if you're a premium subscriber, is right now.
We're going to jump right in to the interview with Bear and Fifi. And if you're not,
well, we're not.
We get to go through a few announcements. First up, if you're not familiar with the premium subscription, it is a way to pay a few bucks a month and skip the announcements up here in the intro. But don't worry, you still get important dates for upcoming events and workshops in the outro. To sign up, go to our website, normalizingnonmonogamy.com, scroll down on the homepage and sign up there.
Next up, we want to remind everybody that we are still ridiculously excited about our upcoming community retreat. That specifically is an in-person community retreat for our virtual community. There is still time to join the virtual community and then come all the way out here to the Bay Area, or maybe it's not all the way for you, but come to the Bay Area on September 13th to the 15th, 2024. So that's just under a month away.
We're super excited.
We're super pumped. We've got a whole weekend full of activities. You can go over to our website, normalizingnonmonogamy.com. You click on the community tab, and right there, you'll be able to see a PDF that explains the whole weekend and everything we have going on, plus information on how to join the virtual community so you can join the in-person retreat and you can meet amazing people from all over the world. We have about 50 people coming in from all over the country, and we're super pumped.
Yes, we're super excited and would love for you to come join us. Next up, a quick reminder to use our favorite way to get tested for STIs. It is stdcheck.com. Go to our website, normalizingnonmonogamy.com, click on the resources tab, and if you use the links there, you get $10 off, making a 10-panel test only $129. You get to know your sexual health status, which is amazing, and you get to support the podcast. So thank you so much in advance for using those links and for going and getting to know your sexual health status.
Yes, and just a quick reminder to anybody, this is a service that Emma Emma and I use. We've been using it for years. Same with all of the other links on that resources tab. Those are resources that we found and used ourselves or had people tell us have been amazing. So there's a lot of great resources over there on that website.
Go check it out.
And while you're there, you can even send us an email or send us a voicemail because we would love to have you come on and tell your New York love story.
Yes, we would love to hear.
Even if you're not from New York.
Yeah, you don't have to be from New York.
And you don't have to be a podcaster, a content creator, or anybody other than yourself. We love all of the stories, and I think all of the stories matter.
Yes, they definitely do. And with that, we'll go and talk with Bear and Fifi. Alrighty, welcome to the podcast, Bear and Fifi. We're excited that you're here today. We only know a little bit about you, so we're excited to dive in and learn a lot more. We'd love for you to start by introducing yourself at whatever level you're comfortable with.
Of course. Okay. Okay, so I can start. My name is Bear. My pronouns are he, him. I am a Black trans man born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. And I am also a Tantra practitioner, relationship coach, and event producer in New York City.
Awesome.
Amazing.
Hi, I'm Fifi, all pronouns and cat. And I am also a New Yorker. I am 31 years old. We're a year apart. Actually, we kind of grew up in the city, going to high school across the street from each other, but we didn't know that at the time. I'm Puerto Rican, born and raised in the Bronx, Westchester area. And I wear many hats as well. I'm a tantric practitioner alongside Bear, and we co-operate our company or business, our mission-based organization, as I like to say. And I'm also involved in nonprofit work in the neighborhoods that I'm from.
Awesome.
Amazing. And we're super excited to dig into all your work and everything. But before we get there, we're gonna hear the story of Bear and Fifi from the beginning. So you grew up not knowing you were going to school across the street from each other. When did you two meet, and how did you meet, and how did all of this kick off?
Yeah, I feel like I can
tell them.
Yeah. So we were actually in a 12-step fellowship together. We were kind of in the same friend groups and had a lot of mutual friends. And but before I actually ended up in this fellowship, I saw Fifi at a party when we were 20 years old. So we were pretty young. This is when they were still a rave baby. They had like little buns in their hair and they were dancing with their friend. And I was with my ex at the time. We were non-monogamous as well, but just in a different kind of constellation than me and Fifi are in now. And yeah, I saw Fifi actually a couple of years prior before actually like dating or consummating our relationship in any capacity. But and then I ended up in that 12-step fellowship. You and I were in the same kind of friend groups, and then we officially kind of interacted. Well, I mean, we played at our first play party together at Submit in front of all of our friends. And from there, we just kept doing that for another 6 years.
It's just standard coming of age story. That's how most couples meet, right?
Right. Right.
I know. Yes. I like to think it's like a New York love story.
Right.
Yeah.
Casual.
Casual. I love that.
Hook up at a play party in front of all your friends.
Right. Which I mean, brings up a question like when it sounds like Bear, at least for you, way back at 20, you were already exploring non-monogamy. I mean, maybe we start on your side of the story. When did it come into your world, and what did it look like in those early days for you?
Yeah, for sure. I think even starting from the way I grew up in a really eccentric, by the standard household. I grew up raised by a lot of different people. My grandparents, my mother, my uncles, my aunts, and we kind of had this really intentional community within Brooklyn, which is wild because it's really hard to cultivate that kind of, I don't know, it just feels like all the things you hear about intentional communities that aren't sex positive spaces are like on the West. But I grew up in this intentional community. It was a Pan-African society that like rejected all forms of westernized or colonial culture. So I already had a blueprint of whatever I'm taught about relationships is not actually the truth, or because this is how it works in my home. And there's a lot of like co-parenting, a lot of raising, just raising each other's kids. There's just so much overlap in community. I grew up with my grandparents for the first half of my life, and they had a third. And I couldn't conceptualize it when I was younger, but I was like, who is this, woman that my grandparents are kissing sometimes on the mouth? Like, what's going on? And she comes over all the time and she's always cooking. And like, she's like an aunt to me, but like not related. So what's the deal? So I already had a blueprint of things looking differently, or relationships can look differently. And it was really strange to manage in New York City public school at the same time because, even though it's New York, most people had like a standard kind of upbringing, or at least polyamory wasn't a part of their family upbringing. So fast forward into college is when I first kind of heard the word polyamory. And I don't know, I just had dated before, and I never not been cheated on. That was like one of the biggest things, that like my partners when I was in high school, when I was in college, always ended up cheating on me in some way, like just withholding information, having a connection with someone else, whether it was sexual or emotional. And I was never upset about the connection itself, but more about the lying. And this is young, where I was just kind of like, I wish you would have told me. Like, we could have created something differently. Or so I had an understanding that relationships didn't have to look like the standard from young. And the thing that obviously, got me upset was just dishonesty or lack of transparency. And then going to college, I went to Purchase College, which is, I don't know, it's just such an art school. Like, I don't know how to explain it. Like, such an art school. It's a state college in New York City, or not New York City, but in Westchester, actually, where SUNY. Yeah, it was a state school. And
our kid since middle school.
I've been an art kid since middle school, yeah. So I've just been doing weird stuff since middle school. And I got, just in the queer community, it felt like the trajectory was like, you come out as queer, and then eventually you start to talk about kink, and then the next step is talking about polyamory. Mm-hmm. And I started dating my ex, who I actually met or saw Sophia for the first time with. And she wanted to be in an open relationship. And like, we can go back to like, if we talk about like my trans journey and like where that kind of came about, but for just the interest of polyamory, she wanted to be in an open relationship about 7 months in. And I remember before dating her, I was in a like really intense monogamous relationship from the age 15 to 17, and I fucking hated it. Like, I just could not deal with what it meant. And I didn't even want to hook up with a lot of people or anything like that. It was just the idea that I couldn't even entertain it, that it couldn't even be something that I was curious about, or just something that I could engage with even in thought. And I get to college and I start dating this person who was kind of like, I want to be monogamous. And then something came up in our relationship, and she asked to be in an open relationship, which I also didn't like. There was something about it that, well, the policy was the don't ask, don't tell policy, which I get, like, no shame. If it works, it works. It did not work for me at 18 years old, navigating a bunch of insecurity. Like, it wasn't really great.
And this was with your ex at the time at 18 years old. Okay.
Right. In college.
Yeah.
Exactly. Right.
Messy.
Yeah, the ask don't tell dynamic for two like 18-year-old, 19-year-old, but it just, I don't really know how that can pan out well. And it didn't pan out well. She ended up leaving me to be monogamous with somebody else. I think a lot of like the secrecy lended itself to, when you like siphon off a relationship and you don't talk about it or don't communicate with it, what happened was that relationship kind of flourished in a way in secret, but in a very monogamous minded way. So yeah, she ended up leaving me for that person, and I kind of swore off dynamics that were hierarchical. Like I thought it would change me in the direction of like I'm just going to be monogamous, but instead I was like, well, we're going to just really radicalize what, and I kind of leapt into solo polyamory and was very okay with this idea of never kind of finding that person, but always having like friends and lovers and deep connections kind of scattered around me. And it's always felt like who I was. I know that there's so many different ways to think of polyamory, but at my core, it feels very essential to the way that I love and relate to other people.
Yeah.
So it's been in the blood for a long time.
And we met right at that moment. We were both coming out of breakups where we were like, no hierarchy, complete anarchy. So it worked, for us in the beginning.
Yeah, that's amazing. I'm just really grateful for you sharing, Baron. I think what I just kind of like a thread through that I found really, I think important is like you like you said, you had a framework, you had a blueprint for this, and so it's like I can see why it was sort of in you, and then you had all of these sort of like disconnecting experiences of like being cheated on, and then even, hey, I want to do non-monogamy, and you're like, okay, well, maybe, but even then that ends up basically being in secret, pairing off in a way that like didn't feel good. And so it's like you had this weird clashing of like, I know there's other ways to do this that are healthy and can be done, and yet I keep like running into walls, and I just imagine the frustration of like people like this. You can do it different, and yet everybody keeps doing it the way that feels like shit. Like I feel for you in that.
Yeah, exactly that feeling.
Right. Yeah. I also wanted to give you the opportunity, Bear. I was going to ask you about your trans journey as well and how that fits into all of this because it's such an important part. And I want to make sure that if you're comfortable, you have time to talk about that too.
And also that we haven't forgotten you, Fifi.
Yes.
We're coming for you too. Don't worry.
First story when I'm like, it always needs to come first because he's the cult kid. He's the one with like all the layers and the intersections, and I'm here for it. It's different every time.
It is
wonderful.
Every time.
Yeah,
but I'm happy to share about, because I don't think that they're really obviously separate, like identity and then sexuality or relationship orientation can be separate, and I also think they really inform each other. I think just starting off already kind of being primed with this question of I was born this way and I'm perceived this way and I need to change it because I want to be happy. That was like my baseline in terms of my gender expression and changing my or going through with my transition. And it's the same with like polyamory, or my relationship orientation was kind of like, I know that this is the way everyone wants me to do this and how I'm supposed to do it, but it does not make me happy. And I think that while polyamory is not necessarily like, I mean, this is up for debate or question, but this idea of like queer or defined as queer, there is something that challenges the status quo of relating. And I think that when we're talking about relationships and sexuality, we can't leave out gender. And because of my willingness to literally like go through with changing my entire life and identity, it was kind of like, well, I better do it with my relationship orientation as well, or stick to it. And to be honest, my polyamory came first. But I think that it's really funny that you ask or like bring up the trans part of my story, because the partner I was talking about, who asked to be in an open relationship with me, identified as someone who was like sapphic, just wanted to be with, well, she identified as bisexual, but wanted to end up with a woman, and definitely had some just like turf qualities to the way she expressed that. And it was really challenging because she was attracted to men or cis men, but was really struggling with me transitioning. So there was a lot of happening, and she asked for an open relationship because basically she was like, I'm going to cheat on you if we don't open up our relationship, because we're 19 and don't have language that is affirming or good to navigate these things. And it's so my polyamory and my non-monogamy, like, officially was kind of born out of a difficult place. I in that relationship with her, I really associated her need to be with other people with something about me being wrong. And that was really hard to move through or internalize. And then it was like the whole dynamic of open relationships. Like, I'm way more of a polyamorous and someone who likes open relationships, or this idea that you can't cultivate emotional connection with other people. So there's this like strange dichotomy that she wanted to create of like, I get these emotional needs met by you, but because of this transition that you're going through, I need to get my sexual needs met somewhere else. And it was really confusing and hard for me, all the way to the point where I didn't feel supported. And, as my family is really eclectic in a lot of ways, but I didn't have the kind of means or the support to transition clinically or medically on my own at that point. And I ended up kind of falling back into the closet for another 7 years and just kind of saying like, that was a blip. Like, I'm just a lesbian, I'm a really, really, really butch lesbian. Like, that is my identity. And even took on some like turfy mentalities about it because I had so much just like I did struggle a lot with shame around being a trans person, and also like this idea of choosing to make my life harder than it already was. And that was the information I was getting. So it wasn't until Fifi and I started dating, and then I think 2 or 3 years into our relationship, I was like, no, I'm a trans man. Like, there's this has gone on too long. Like, I am definitely a trans guy. And it was COVID. Yeah. It was during the lockdown where I kind of was only, I don't know, like, what do you do when you're just with yourself? You just kind of think about the truth. And I asked myself the question of, who would I be if no one was looking? Like, if there were no consequences and I could choose right now, what would my gender identity be? How would I present? And I was a man. I would be a man. And from there, I was more stable in my like home and my finances, and I was able to really kind of take off and become my authentic self.
Yeah, and you were working, and so you like socially transitioned. Although it was COVID, like you made those moves amidst a lot of other shifts that were happening.
Yeah.
So that was cool.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing, Bear.
Not an easy journey at all.
Yeah. And I think there's an interest. I don't know if it's a question. It was just a thought that came to mind, and please expand on it. I'm curious, like, your perspective of this, because in the world of non-monogamy and polyamory, we often hear, right, well, one of the great things is my partners don't have to fulfill all my needs, or I don't have to fulfill all my partner's needs. And yet when you're 19 and you're battling the internal conflict of like, what is my gender? To be in a place where your partner's saying like, well, I get my emotional, even if they're not directly saying it, but I get my emotional needs met here, but I have to go and get my sexual needs somewhere else. Like, that's a thing we sing the praises of in non-monogamy, but I can see at that crossroads of life, and also just being 19 and everything else, like that there's like not a frame, there's not a way to process that, and like a way where you're like, oh yeah, that feels good. Like, yeah. I'm like, there was like a moment I'm like, well, wait a minute, that's the thing we preach. And also like, that'd be a really fucked up time to have to try to like confront that as a reality.
Precisely that.
Yeah, like, great.
I almost liked it.
Right.
Yeah.
In theory.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I mean, it's not easy for us to swallow at any stage, a lot of us, but like, yeah, at that point in particular, I'm like, okay, that would be extra hard to like, yeah, like a great concept. Like you said, Fifi, like the concept is there, but like the actualization of it is a totally different story.
Yeah.
No, for sure. That's true.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, maybe we pull in Fifi's side and then
we could ask you a million questions.
And
there,
we will.
But
Yeah.
I would love to hear, we'd love to hear too from you, Fifi, and kind of what is your story?
I think there's the adjacent story. 'Cause in listening to yours, there is, what I hear are your experiences as I saw them, and then also like reminders of what is true that sometimes forget, which is that you had this other partner and that you went back into the closet for 7 years. And we were dating for
almost 3.
almost 3 years before he came out. And, I guess like my versions of the story were I was suspicious from the very beginning. But then, it was COVID. So it was a time when we also had started our channel at that point. And so it was a very visible transition because we had gained a following. There weren't that many polyamory creators at the time, it felt like 4 years ago. And people really expressed appreciation and gratitude for you sharing yourself so vulnerably. And we created art during that time. I would say, witnessing you through your transition and gender journey. And this is true for me as far as my queer journey goes in general, is that you've helped me come out the closet. And just being around people, queer people who are radically themselves in ways that seem scary, really has given me the courage to embody myself in more authentic ways as well. So I think the journey of your journey, or the journey of our relationship together, has been one of like parallel and intersected, but primarily one of mutual uplifting, I think. There's never been we've gone through phases of what our dynamic is and what the power exchange is like, but it's always been this mutual kind of eye to eye. I see you as you are, and I respect you and admire you, and it inspires me to be more myself as well. So, since it was one of the first things that really attracted me to him, like that night when we went to go play at the play party, before then, he was performing spoken word. He is an artist, as we've been talking about, and that just already, like, panties wet, ready to go. Just like, oh my God, you look like that. And your heart is so tender and soft and on your sleeve. I mean, I was like, I need, a hard looking boy who is just really soft on the inside. And from then on forward, it really has been kind of like just encouraging each other. And so I guess my journey, I've kind of sprinkled a little bit in there about it. And it's that I was, before being fully gender queer as I am now and pansexual, polyamorous, it started off first as, I would say, bicurious was the term that I used. Since I was very little, I always made out with my friends, with my close girlfriends. I wasn't sure what that was about. But it seemed like we were all just practicing for when we were to be with boys. I don't know, but like I found it better than boy crushes. And I really love seeing kind of the new generation of femme queerness right now, because it really reminds me of myself coming of age, like very much femme embodied. So I think that kind of influenced my process of coming out. I was like, I can't be queer. I look straight. And, what does that even mean? Very made up. And until I started just to open myself up to more queer experiences, I went to a boarding school because I was a bad kid. So I, what the intersection between neurodivergence and queerness and all of these other things, I think for me, like the behavioral journey is definitely kind of coincided with accepting myself and finding recovery. So I was a bad teenager and hooking up with girls in my dorm room, and eventually got kicked out of high school and had a little rough start before I graduated from college. And that's when I started a recovery journey in the 12-step fellowship, which was where we met each other. And I was a serial cheater. So on top of really confused, not really I'm curious, I'm just going to get drunk and make out with people because there's things about myself that are really hard to accept and I don't know how to talk about it. So self-harm. And then recovery comes around and I start to see people modeling queerness and honesty and transparency in their relationships. Where oh, I don't have to lie and cheat. I can be honest about what I want in relationships, and it might be with everyone. I might want relationships with everyone. And can someone love me for that? So I found sex positive community here in New York and kind of dove headfirst into it. I was very nerdy about it. I found myself a dom to mentor me. I went to workshops. I volunteered. And eventually, in the trajectory of that, we ended up at the same play party. And I was like, I didn't know you were into this. You don't look like you would be into this. And I don't know what that meant. I just thought you were I don't know what it was. I was just surprised.
They wore a lot of flannel.
Well, I would just say in the Midwest, that's standard dress code for a sex party. So we that's what we used to see all the time. It was flannel. Yeah, no problem there.
At least I know somewhere I'd be accepted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, I'm curious, and just thank you both for sort of the taking us up to the point where your stories kind of come together. And I'm curious when you two did come together, how you then set off on a path of being open and right. Because Bear, you're coming out of a dynamic where you're like, polyamory didn't work. It was this don't ask, don't tell. It didn't feel good. And Fifi, having all of your prior experiences, how did you two come together and what did you initially create?
We were two anarchists and a connection together. I think that we started off and still remain as comrades. And we really went slow. We were both coming out of these experiences of hierarchical dynamics that crash and burn in different ways. And we weren't following the same script of all right, let's sleep over for 3 days in a row, which is before I came out, that was a sapphic way. You just meet, you go move at queer time and fall in love instantly and you're gonna marry this person.
U-Haul.
But that is not the way we operated. We went at the speed of trust, that I like to call it, where we cultivated a lot of companionship before jumping into sleepovers and spending hours and days together and just not leaving the room, a lot of the way my old relationships looked. And it created this kind of baseline of independence, I think, that was really supportive for us, especially for what each of us needed at the time. So we like to say that we're solo polyamorous who live together and run a business together, because I think there's the familial dynamic that we've cultivated over 6 years of being together, growing up together throughout our 20s. And then our sexual and romantic relationship is kind of in this polyamorous anarchist way, but we have all these other, I don't like the word tethering because it can sound super but it is we have all these other roots to each other. So it kind of allows sex and romance to float differently while we have all of these other bonds. And we cultivated that bond from young. We started as this idea of well, we have great sex, and we also really, I remember the first time you talked to me about another partner,
Mm-hmm.
and you were like, oh, I can talk to you about these things. Like, you're my friend. Like, I can talk to you about my other partners. I can vent to you about my feelings. I can, find the support here. And I don't know, for me, it was so sincere and wholesome because it wasn't attached to an escalator. It was just this idea of like, wow, this person is really incredible. And I don't really care what this looks like. I just want a sense of closeness to this person for a very long time. So I was really down for whatever it was supposed to look like. And I was like, all right, you don't want to spend 3 days at a time with me? That's fine. Like, I'll find so many other things to do in that time. But yeah, I think that was kind of our baseline.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Don't want that.
No.
Tough. I mean, it was a big deal to move in. That was a big threshold we said we weren't going to cross, but we have a two-bed, two-bath situation, which is like very luxurious in New York, but we managed to make it work, and co-living in a small apartment works when you have two separate spaces.
A little space.
Yep.
Yeah.
To where you can have the healthy like interdependence, where you have your togetherness and you have your separateness all sort of baked in to one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it is an art to figure that out in a small space. We've definitely been on that journey as well.
Totally. Well, I think it's one of the interesting things that I would love to talk a little bit about is the sort of both of your dedication to the non-hierarchy of the whole dynamic, while also one of the things around hierarchy we often talk about is like there are often inherent hierarchies built in, right? And so the fact that you two live together, run a business together, create art together, how do you two sort of balance those things exist, and you call them roots, like you have different, maybe more roots to each other than to other people, but also sort of maintaining that dedication to not putting that up on a pedestal where you become hierarchical.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
No.
I mean, it's hard to convince people that that's the case, and I understand why. And I've had the experience, and maybe in ways you have too, of partners feeling really discouraged just because of our commitments to each other and the things that we share, and how no matter what we say, we live by in principle, the things on paper just feel too heavy emotionally for people to feel secure committing or giving of themselves, which I understand and I think is a challenging part about it. So really it's like, even though we live by it, it's actually more to the discretion of who we invite into our lives to feel that that is true. Because I would say, I think in romantic partnership, it becomes more muddled. It's our long-term friends who share with us, like our friends here staying with us during Pride weekend. Every Pride weekend, we have sort of a family reunion, and the friends that show up to that definitely are a part of our polyamory family. And, I call them my boyfriends, and it feels very expansive in that sense. So really what it's helped to teach me is that not everyone's going to be on board with that version, and there are going to be intimidating components about it. So I think just holding space for that and that truth, and also that it is true that the weight of our relationship is at a significance that if anything were to happen here, like, because it's so much of my world and my life, it would really compromise my sense of self and everything like that in a way where I don't think other relationships would necessarily. Like, I don't even know if it's fair to say that. It's it's like on paper, right? But I also really love these other people just as much. But I think really just holding it true to the heart, and it being kind of like a little bit of a faith-based thing, to ask people to like be on board with it, maybe if they want to try and believe.
Yeah.
I think validating. I think instead of, because we have things in my life that I had, like in moments, I would have to prioritize, like our home, our business, which is like having a child, and you know, literal time that we've spent together. We've been together for 6 years, like have become family to each other. So it is intimidating. And instead of, I think what can happen with folks is they need to convince people like, it's not hierarchy, it's not hierarchy, instead of just saying like, oh, that's impactful. And I see why this, because it is true. I'm not going to deny any of the, if Fifi calls me and something is happening with our, home, our work, in their life at all, there is this idea that I want to show up for that because of the comfort we've cultivated. And, finding people who really understand that. I find that it's a lot easier just to date someone who is partnered in some capacity, like as opposed to dating someone who's new to polyamory and like doesn't have another partner and is starting, that can be really challenging emotionally for me and for that person. So really creating an understanding with transparency of what's actually happening as opposed to avoiding hierarchy or the level of priority that my relationship with Fifi takes in my life, creating a space in which I think hierarchy becomes when it's like, what happens here goes, and whatever you feel or want does not go, no matter what, because those are the rules. And instead, when I lead with transparency, like these are all the things that I share with this partner, that's not going to change. Where can we meet each other? What feels good, or what feels, which feels a lot better than trying to tell someone like, it's not that, because it might be, or at least feels that way. So I want to hold that truth instead.
Yeah, I love that. And I think the thing that I feel often gets lost in these conversations around hierarchy is that non-hierarchical doesn't mean everybody's equal and everybody gets exactly the same, right? If you have your partnership and let's say, I don't love the language, but you add a third person, you don't just take the pie and split it 3 ways and then, oh, here's a fourth. No, now we just split it 4 ways. Like at a certain point, you won't have any time left to do because you are building a business, right? That'd be like expecting your partner to be like, hey, you used to go to work for 8 hours a day, but now I'm in your life. And this is not hierarchical, so you only get to go to work for 5 hours a day now. Like, I don't think so. Like, I have to right, because you are building a business, you are intertwined in a way that you might not be with somebody else. But I love that if you can lead with the transparency to say, here's the person you're getting into a partnership with, and here's the capacity I have. Does that work for you? And what can we build that works for both of us versus just the assumptions? And we're just going to divide it up and everybody gets the same thing. Like, because that's very rare that you can do that in life. Just start dividing things equally. Yeah.
No, big misconception.
Right. Yeah. I'm curious, along your journey, I know you two run a business together and we definitely want to talk more about that, but how has it gone in your world being open about who you both are and in this public way, with family, friends? How has that how has that journey gone?
I think that do you want to go first?
You, please take it.
Okay.
You started.
So my family obviously is very eccentric, but it's also like very estranged. So there's like a relationship I have with the adults in my life, or not in my, whatever, that it's kind of like, I'm not fearful of them finding out, or they, a lot of my aunts follow our page, but it's not something that's spoken about, mostly because I'm pretty independent of my family. Like there's not a lot of stake there in terms of care that I would lose out on by being, or like not much would change. And I think with friends, I've definitely, with friends, it's different because I'm not kind of waiting to be rejected in the same way that I would like a parent or an aunt or whoever, someone who I like perceive has some version of authority over me. But there's something even more kind of sad where it's like we don't see the world the same way. And maybe we're outgrowing each other to some capacity, or just like growing in different directions. So I've definitely seen my friend groups kind of change over time. There's some friends who I've been friends with forever who kind of, even if they're living like life monogamously, have this kind of proximity, whether it's via queerness or via other ways that you can kind of think about relationships differently and entertain this idea that people can be polyamorous and it's like an effective way to live. But there's definitely friend groups, especially my friends from high school, where it just dwindled. Like we just ran out of things to talk about and relate to. And I think I practice polyamory as an orientation because it's just the only way I know how to relate. But I also practice it politically. I practice it as a principle of challenging the status quo and maybe like it being okay that I'm not okay with the way the world works. And like I want to imagine a different world. So I think a lot of my friendships have ended or dwindled over like not having the same thing in common when it comes to that fervor of wanting to reimagine relationships and how we take care of each other. And I think my polyamory is so much more than just like sex or romance. It's about community, because that's how I was raised. I was raised under this idea that like if my mom can't do it, my grandmother can do it. If my grandmother can't do it, Cheryl can do it. They're third, right? Like someone can pick up and act in this equitable way as opposed to like equals. And yeah, that's kind of what my experience has been in both friendship and family.
You've definitely experienced more of a response to your polyamory from friends because, like I said, I was burning bridges up until college. So I didn't really have those friends that, I mean, some, but I can see how you maintained a lot more of those connections. And I think in the world that we grew up in, I think inner city, BIPOC, the first deviation, I think, is the queerness aspect. And you did that kind of first, it's usually queerness, then it's kink, and then it, and that seemed kind of your trajectory there. And it was clear in which parts your friends got left behind. I was very solo adventure for pretty much up until I think I met you and started relating to you in a way where I didn't feel like I needed to report back. And so I did a lot of things on my own, like Burning Man. And so I made sure to immerse myself in worlds that already were very accepting, but I was very secretive with my family. My parents are immigrants, and they, although not together anymore, I think really up until I was a full independent adult, they were really holding on to this idea of family, even though their marriage was not like, we're much happier now that they're separated, all of us as a family. And even though my dad used to preach like things like don't have kids, traditional families are, I got a lot of my radical ideology from him, but the dysfunction of it all, I felt like there were things bad with what I was doing. There was a lot of shame and guilt around it. I think my journey with a lot of my non-monogamy and queerness is a secret. And so through our relationship, my queer friends, recovery, and coming more into myself, I started to do things like performing. So I took up burlesque, and I decided that I just wanted to be more out and more myself, but still very closeted from my family. And so I got discovered, my burlesque Instagram got discovered by family on the island of Puerto Rico. And there were, now everyone's talking about Fifi's a stripper. And so I had to come out to my parents pretty formally about not just being, there was a coming out of queerness, but then there was a coming out of like sexuality. And I think polyamory is still like not something they're very aware of, but no longer hiding it. I think I've definitely have my journey and my relationship to discretion and disclosure, because of people, places, and things. And I think coming from a cultural background where my parents had to sacrifice so much for my sibling and I to have the life that we have, there really was never the sense that I needed them to understand something, because they can barely understand the language sometimes. So to think that like some things are out of their reach and find acceptance of that, and navigate like being myself and them learning to love me, and I think is still something I'm navigating today. But so definitely like the distinction between family and friends. I luckily, once I just found my tribe, so to speak, I really found them, and I've always pursued the radically open-minded people. And then, I think on the family side of things, cultivating new family and having a version of family here and chosen fam helps to correct a lot of that and build new reference to what it looks like to be my full self in a home setting.
Yeah. Thank you so much both for sharing. They're beautiful journeys, also imagine like really hard at times.
Well, yeah.
Which I think the question that was coming to me as you both were talking is, I don't know the best way to phrase it. So if it misses, we'll figure it out.
We'll try again.
But it's really just around, you've sort of, it's going to be 2 parts, but I'm only going to ask the first part now. And the first part is, for each of you, how have you felt that the last, it sounds like roughly decade or so of exploring non-monogamy in a, I don't want to say more structured way, but in a way where you've actually defined it and leaned into it rather than just like kind of clunking around in it. How have each of you felt yourselves heal through that journey?
I think there's a level of agency that I get to experience and intimacy that, I just feel like anybody with a family and learning about relationships and having their own versions of trauma or abuse or like whatever, and then the world around us that isn't super forgiving or open or expansive when it comes to relating, I think that the ability to design my relationships and choose what I want and co-create what I want or not want or compromise in ways that are meaningful to me. Like, I don't know, I've learned how to quote unquote like sacrifice, but not necessarily with this negative connotation. Like this willingness to choose or continue to be with someone and people and build relationships. I think polyamory has taught me so much more, again, than just about like free love. We can have sex and hang out with whoever we want, but communicating instead of running away from relationships and redefining or reframing relationships instead of completely ending them because there's an incompatibility somewhere. It's taught me that relationships can have longevity, can have sustainability through change, can there's like, it's so funny because I'm such an anarchist, such a polyamorous. And there's also this belief that like you pick your people and you stick by them and you continue to commit to all the changes that your partners and friends and lovers and homie, like whatever words you want to use, go through and witness them through that. And that has been the most healing to me because I think I come from a really tumultuous background. As much as like the cult and everything is really interesting, there's a lot of funky stuff happening in my family that would send messages like relationships are dangerous, run away, like these are not intimacy is not a safe place. And what polyamory has taught me, Fifi brought up our friend who's staying here, which is a part of our polycule, even if it's not a sexual romantic dynamic, is this belief that like we can make mistakes, we can grow, we can change, and we can stick by each other because something in this world has to make sense. And like, if it's anything, it's got to be love, it's got to be commitment, and it's got to be like the way we take care of each other. And I get to design that now, as opposed to following a script that doesn't resonate with me, with the full spectrum of who I am.
Yeah.
Wow, so beautiful.
Hey,
I
thanks.
feel like polyamory has honestly, although people think it is about more and more and more, and it's, greedy people that want everything, it's taught me to slow down, because I think previously I was operating off this, like I was saying, secretive way of operating that was harming me and the people I was in relationship with. And because this model does not punish me for having those desires, now I have to articulate it. I have to sit down and say it out loud. And that process is very healing, because it shows me that there isn't anything to be or ashamed or embarrassed about. And that these are parts of myself that I don't have to hide and conceal. But it's definitely taught me a lot about myself, and like the parts I need to correct around my own kind of shame and guilt with things like, why am I pursuing this relationship? Like, do I just want a one night stand? And could it be that? I think like navigating those tastes and flavors and appetites about myself, I think the relationship with sexuality is very connected to my polyamory journey. So really, it's just offered a practice grounds for self-acceptance. And I think through that also, like, finding the people who can love me for who I am, that the true, like, finding the resonance and the places that feel warm.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you both. And there's a second part to your
There is. The second part's coming. I wanted to touch on one thing that, like, you both kind of wove into that, was around the relationship anarchy, or just even the idea that it's just greedy people who want more and more and more. And I think what is, as you were talking, it like kind of crystallized for me, is one of the interesting things about what we do is, like, in a sense, like, that is an option, but when you really like pare it back, the amount of organization, communication, and skills that you have to show up with to achieve more, as far as like adding in love and relationships and connection, that becomes the limiting thing. It's like you can't just run around and do whatever with whoever, because that will blow up in your face in a very big way, versus like, I want to add one more person, and you're like, okay, that's 7 times the work. Do I want to do, is it worth the work to do the addition? Like, it's, I don't know. I just find that really interesting, that I think it gets lost in there sometimes.
True. It's a lot of work.
So the second part of the question was, same question, but for each other. I guess, Fifi, how have you sort of watched Bear sort of grow and heal over the last, your time together, and Bear, the same for what you've seen in Fifi?
Oh, I love this question.
I think I've just seen you learn, like, in the light of what you shared about yourself and slowing down. I think, like, we were so young when we started dating, and because of the way that you were socialized as a femme, kind of always constantly having to be in response to like who you were being pursued by, because men, I know us. Like, and I've watched you really take at the fact that, our relationship is this baseline of freedom and acceptance and authentically loving each other through that. So this idea of like us not having to ask each other permission, I've really gotten to see like the fact that you're not someone who necessarily needs to be dating so many people at once, or and really owning that you're someone who enjoys privacy and solitude, and like really takes the time to take time for themselves, and not feeling, I know we like move through so many things here, and it's like not linear, but really coming to terms with who you are and how you relate, and that it's quote unquote like different than the way that people anticipate that you're going to relate to them, which is you're someone who, like, I think Air more like aromantic, like doesn't feel the need. You're not really preoccupied with sex and romance in the same capacity. And I think I've just watched polyamory be a space where you can own that and get and define relationships in ways that do actually resonate with you, instead of having to adjust to the kind of expectations of largely like cis straight men just being like, you are a woman, you need to behave this way. And you being like, neither of those things are true. So, yeah, I think I've watched you kind of own what you have felt set apart from the world by like these things, or the ways that you relate that might be really different, being neurodivergent, being someone who is, again, not so preoccupied with sex and romance and wants to relate to the world differently, largely. Yeah, it's just been really cool to watch you step into that authenticity.
It's because you do it so well too. No, I mean, my feedback on what I've witnessed is like, I've gotten all my lessons on integrity from Bear. I don't know a more honest person in terms of your emotional connection to yourself. I think that inability to be dishonest in relationships has been the inspiration for me to continue to be more honest in mine. So I've seen you go through a similar arc as well, and discovering things about yourself and bringing those parts of yourself to your relationships, and sort of what he described before as far as like what motivates you about polyamory, seeing that in practice in a way that I think is just very impressive, because ways of cultivating comfort and safety in relationships is something that still feels very mystical and mysterious to me. And a lot of my knowing how to slow down came from seeing you and the joy that you derive from simple pleasures. And polyamory, I guess, like has been informed by a lot of different things for you, and you come about it from this sort of orientation way, but it is a practice, and there's like a right way to do it and a wrong way to do it, kind of. And I get sometimes lost and like, oh, but what if I ain't gonna do it like this? And he's coached me so much on how, that sounds, what are you really feeling beneath that, what you're saying? So I just know that polyamory has been a ground for you to remain true. So just so proud of you.
That was nice.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you both.
Thank you both so much. So, yeah, I love witnessing the love and care and just genuine admiration for each other and yourselves individually as well. I know we could talk all day and ask you a million questions, but
we also have the freedom to bring you back on as much as we want. So that's the beauty of owning your own business.
We would love for you to take some time to talk about the work that you do.
Yeah.
The meat and potatoes.
Yeah. What feels the most like the
relevant?
Yeah, kind of at the heart of it.
I think we started our work, it started as content creation to make more accessible this idea of alternative relating and relating in ways that challenge social standards. And it started during the lockdown. And I think similar to my transition, you initiated it. Like while I was moving through my transition and working at this really wild job, you kind of have your own experience of what I witnessed was basically like, if no one's watching, who would I want to be in the world? What do I want to give to the world? Do I want to spend 8 hours of my day giving to like Fifi's also a recovering architect. So giving to this weird furniture firm that doesn't really like give to the world in any capacity besides this product that I'm so bored by. And watching you kind of just ignite during that time and believe in us that like our stories and our backgrounds and all the things that we learn through our professional lives separately can really create something super meaningful for the communities that we care about. And it started as content creation that content literally started to transform into workshops about sex and relationships and communication and race and gender and all of these things that are so important when we talk about relationships. And it just kind of kept fucking expanding, sometimes faster than we could keep up with, which has caused, I mean, y'all run a business together, you know what it is. That there are moments where like priorities shift and, really learning this together. But it feels like it started from the same place of like, who would we be if there were no kind of consequences and let's do it anyway despite the consequences is what it felt like.
Yeah. No, I mean, that is the place that it came from and what it's become. It's really complicated, I have to say, because of capitalism. And, if running a business didn't also then, now after 4 years of launching ourselves out there, I do like starting from that place and keeping it that's really what's at the core of it, because as we get paid to share our stories, and we got certified as tantric practitioners. So luckily, I think we've been able to create that separation that feels better, I think, through our coaching and our one-on-one work with couples and individuals, and being able to bring in what we learned from our training and keeping it true to it still being about wanting to share this message that alternative ways of relating are possible. And, the fact that we even consider them alternative is part of the problem. And so I do think that as far as our work is concerned, it feels like a mission that's super personal and about our own journeys and our own healing. And then also just wanting to offer an entry point to people who are curious or wanting to know more, especially people who might relate to our upbringing and who we are.
Yeah. Amazing. I love that.
I love it too. And I think that there's such a need for that as well. And, of course, like links to everything that you're like talking about and
all the ways to work with you too will be there.
Will be in the show notes so people can find you.
Yeah. And thank you for doing the work. Like it's hard. I mean, coming from our side, right, where you to try to make a living, right? As much as we all hate capitalism and all the bullshit that goes with it, like the reality is we have to make a living. We can't go to our landlords and be like, "Can I interest you in 5 podcast episodes as payment for rent this month?" Like they don't take them, and so we have to figure out how to like do work that's meaningful, make it accessible to as many people that need it, and be able to keep doing it so we can keep it going. So just grateful to the two of you for what you do and for being here to share your story.
Yeah.
And thank you guys for putting this show on and normalizing non-monogamy. Yes, that's what we're here for.
We're doing our damnedest.
Yeah. Thank you. Before we let you both go today, is there anything else you wanted to get out there in the world? Knowing that this is not your last opportunity.
I think it is important to see partners who work together, because in rethinking relationships, I grew up kind of, and it's not that it's not challenging. It's absolutely challenging for a number of reasons. But I think, and as we reimagine relationships and worlds and what it means to kind of what I said before, like sticking by each other. It's really powerful to see like people deciding to create in spaces where we're taught like you're not supposed to do that. You can't mix, like the siphoning that I was talking, where my ex left me for somebody else. Like that's what ended up happening. But more integration, and it's not that everyone needs to do it, but I think learning that it's possible, or learning that it's not like a bad thing to work where you play or play where you work, or even do work that is the labor of love, that is about relationships, and sometimes who better to know it than the people who have been together for as long as they've had and created different, or like moved through so many different like revolutions of each other. So yeah, I just wanted to name that, like that we're two couples talking to each other right now and kind of do similar work in the world. And I think that's really important for people to see, that it's possible to reimagine these things.
Yeah, to really dismantle the systems of oppression, kind of. I think like what creating this together has shown me is how to really center the most important things. I think when you do work that integrates a partner or a loved one, and it you feel that deep, and the stakes feel high, and that's okay. It's okay to feel really big and want things really bad. In fact, it kind of is superhuman and alive and connects me closer to the parts that sometimes I find very overwhelming, but also very awe-inspiring, and also the same things that motivate me to stick around and see things through. So find that inspiration, whether in your relationships plural, including those with yourself. So I hope us and you all and everyone else that you invite here offers some form of, oh, that could be me. Or I that resonates with me. If they can do it, maybe I can also pursue it too.
Yeah.
I love that. I think that in that too, right, Barry, you kind of said, like, who better to do this than the people who have maybe walked this or fought some of these battles. And I think that's so important to remember is, right, you two have had struggles along the ways of your own. We've had ours. And I think the people who can show up and say, oh, I've never felt jealous. It's just compersion for me, and I've never had any issues. I'm going to coach people on how to do that. Not to say that their story is not valid and that's not great, but it's really hard to coach or help somebody learn something that you've actually never had to learn yourself, because it was just, you were just maybe good at it, right? And there's, again, no shame to them, like good for them. They didn't have to fight that fight, but it's also harder to teach somebody, or at least to have the empathy to say, oh, I was there. I've been at the rock bottom with you. Like, so.
Yes. I think we all have our rock bottom.
Yeah, right. And I just love what both of you just added, and like, and calling out to like the four of us talking like in the way you did. Thank you for doing that. And thank you both just for everything that you shared. We know this won't be the last time that we talk, and we are excited for future collaborations and figuring things out. And just thank you again for everything today. We hope you have a wonderful rest of your Friday.
Yes, thank you. It's Pride Weekend here, so we'll be celebrating.
Yes, here too.
It is here too, so...
Good Pride.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Thank you guys. This was fun.
And we're back. Thank you so much again, Bear and Fifi, for coming on, sharing your beautiful story, and for all of the amazing work that you do. A quick reminder that to everyone listening, go and to our website, normalizingnonmonogamy.com, click on the podcast tab. You can find photos of our guests as well as links to all of Bear and Fifi's work there.
Yeah. I'll just echo the gratitude. Thank you, Bear and Fifi. We're excited to have you in our orbit and to, get your story out there. So thank you. And I think this is another one that we'll be bringing Bear and Fifi back.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. This New York love story has multiple, I think it's maybe a trilogy.
Yeah. I can't wait.
All right.
This Friday,
Oh, I forgot.
Yeah.
This Friday, we have an Ask Us Anything episode.
We do.
Yeah. We had the wonderful Laura Boyle come on. She is the host of the Ready for Polyamory podcast and the creator of the Ready for Polyamory blog. And she's also a relationship coach and does incredible work and just wrote a brand new book. All that to say, come back Friday. You'll get to hear us, Miche and me, talking with Laura about finances in polyamory and non-monogamy.
Yes, you're going to want to go listen.
It's a great conversation.
And then next week, we have a super exciting interview to bring to you. It is going to be an update. So, those of you who are longtime listeners may remember back in episode 34, we talked to Jess and Sean. And then episodes 69, 70, and 71, we talked to Jess, Sean, Ken, and Kate in different configurations.
Yeah.
And
a polyamorous quad.
A poly quad. And that was back in 2018 and 2019 at the very beginning of our podcast. And we bring them all back for an update 5 years later, all 4 of them next week. So we'll be talking with Jess, Sean, Kate, and Ken next week, episode 355.
Yeah.
So come back and listen.
I will say too, this is thanks to one of our listeners.
Yes,
happened.
That's true.
Yeah, somebody emailed us. This is just for fun here. Somebody emailed us and was like, hey, whatever happened with that quad? And I was like, that's a really great question. Because we'd kept in touch loosely, but we hadn't touched base with them in a little while. Sent Sean a message, and within a week we were on a damn Zoom call.
Getting an update.
Having a conversation. So it was fantastic, and it's a great conversation. I would say you don't need to have listened to all of the previous ones to get a lot out of this, but context is always great.
We wanted to tell you now in case you wanted to listen before next week. All the links to those episodes I mentioned will be in the podcast show note for this episode.
All right. With that, you have a wonderful, nice couple of days. I will see you on Friday with Miche. Emma will be resting, and we'll see you back here next week for that quad update.
Yep.
All right.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for listening.